Welcome to Strung Out, the podcast that looks at life through the lens of an artist. Your host is the artist, writer, and musician, Martin Lawrence McCormack. Now here's Marty.
Hey, great to have you with us, and we are on location of an artist, Kenny LAPINS. And Kenny is an artist that Fauvism, right? That's the style of art. And we're going to talk to Kenny. We're going to do a two-podcast special here because there's a lot to cover here. One of the things, as you notice, we're in your house, and this is your studio as well, which I love because I think most artists, if you can turn your home into the studio and we're surrounded by his beautiful art, this is the way to go, I mean, sometimes, you can, like at the Fulton Street Collective, you can work at a place like that.
Right.
But all the more power to you when you're in your own home and doing creative work. And we should talk about that, but maybe we'll save that for the second one. Let's find out about you.
Okay.
First of all, you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you decided to get into Fauvism, or how it found you.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I started painting about 11 years ago.
Okay.
I'm 57 years old now, so I didn't start painting until I was 46. Yeah. And if you had told me 20 years ago, hey, you're going to be a painter, I would have laughed in your face because I'm not artistic. I can't draw. I to this day, I still can't sketch or draw. So when I'm beginning a painting, it's a little bit of a challenge, actually. But a friend of mine, Anne Marie Morgan, who's also an artist, said to me, hey, do you want to go to one of those fun drinking and painting classes at Bottles and Bottega down in Chicago?
Okay.
And I said, sure, I can't paint, and I've never done anything like that, but I'll certainly be happy to go with you because it'll be fun. So it was the class was painting a scene of Chicago, of the Chicago Theater, and a trolley car in front. And and in these classes they give you the painting ahead of time, and they say, okay, now reproduce this, and the teacher walks you through how to do that. And you get a little paper plate with acrylic paints and some brush, and so not a lot of stuff to go to start with, if you have no idea what you're doing. But as we went through the class, I was doing it, and I was enjoying it. I was able to reproduce what I wanted to reproduce, which is the important thing. And the teacher at one point came by everyone's painting, and she stopped behind mine, and she said, wow, you're really good. How long have you been a painter? I'm like, this is my first painting, so 15 minutes. And she said, okay, well, that's great. Never take a class in painting, because you will lose this style that you have.
What great advice.
Right, it was amazing. And not only was it great advice, but it also sparked something in me. It was like, a great teacher or mentor you might have that gives you confidence. That one statement that she made, hey, that's a great painting, how long have you been a painter, you're amazing, literally started that moment. That's my origin story. If I was a superhero, that's when the acid got poured on my body, or I fell into the bed of acid. I just became a painter at that moment, and I finished the painting, and I ultimately sold it, which is ironic. And then I actually went to another one with another friend of mine, and and painted that and enjoyed it. And that painting's actually hanging up right there. And then I did the thing that I think puts me in the next level, which was I bought my own supplies. I went to Michael's and bought some paints, and I only knew what I learned in that class. So I bought the paints that I saw there, and the brushes that I saw there, and the canvas that I saw there, and a palette, and went home and went to their website, the Bottles of Bodega website, and printed out one of the paintings that they have in their class and painted it by myself.
Fun, yeah.
And that's my first painting I did myself, and that painting's actually hanging over there. So that's when I started. So then I started to think about, what is this style that she told me about? And I kind of looked at the way I painted the images and how they differed from the reference paintings that they were showing us. And I realized that what I was doing was I was making color the focus of the painting. As opposed to whatever it is that I was painting, whatever building or landscape scene that I was painting. It wasn't necessarily the focus. It was the colors that I was choosing. And I was not necessarily choosing naturalistic colors.
Right.
So my skies were purple, the buildings were orange, whatever. And so I did a little research and realized that, I didn't invent that. That was something that Henri Matisse came up with and Van Gogh came up with in 1900 in a style called Fauvism, which is where you take unnatural colors, blow them out, and have the painterliness of the painting be the focus, as opposed to I am painting a Renaissance theme of angels that are doing this, and that's what the painting's about. And so that gave me all sorts of freedom.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have to worry about, are my lines straight? Because they're not. Are my colors correct? Because they're not. And I can choose any topic, any subject, and have it be a Fauvis painting because it's the color that is the focus.
And what's nice is you found your niche, so to speak.
Right.
And
right away.
Right away. Yeah.
Which makes me think, I was in some way destined to do this. Now, what's
interesting,
which is really even more interesting, is that I'm also a cancer survivor. And I had chemotherapy, which damaged my brain pretty considerably. I have a little bit of aphasia, and I'm sure we'll see that as this interview goes on. I have trouble coming up with the word that I want to say every once in a while, not all the time. And other kinds of cognitive difficulties have arisen, and I've taken some cognitive tests, and then it shows a mild to moderate cognitive decline.
Sure.
And I was talking to and previous to this, my full-time career and what I've been most of my life is a professional writer. So that's the way I've always expressed myself through writing, and I found that that's kind of dropped off a little bit because the aphasia affects my coming up with words, right? However, I was talking to my neurologist about this, and she said, yes, it's very likely that the damage that was done to your brain affecting your speech center has uncovered some area in your brain related to the visual side of life.
So,
and
one art gives way to the other.
Indeed, and I think that's absolutely fascinating. Cool. And it's not actually unheard of in science. There have been cases in which artists have changed. For example, Ravel, who created most famously the Bolero, which is, as you know, a very repetitive art piece of music.
Right.
It's the same theme over and over again, and builds, and it's still beautiful, but it's very unlike everything else he had composed up to that point.
Right.
And it turns out that he was in the early stages of a brain disease. I don't exactly know which one it was, if it was dementia or whatever, but it was a brain disease which caused him to see art in a different way, in this repetitive way. And not only that, but there was a painter who painted a painting based on Ravel's Bolero. And the painting itself, therefore, was very repetitive, and her art started to become that. And it turns out she had that same mental decline.
Holy cows. Well,
so it's not unheard of that a brain problem in one area can uncover something else in another.
Has your writing, do you still write?
I do. I still work as a professional writer. It's my job.
Okay.
It's much more difficult for me
Right.
than it was, which is unfortunate. And at the end of the day, I'm extremely tired because I'm basically running on fumes. I'm using
Right.
what's called executive reserve
Sure.
to do my work, as opposed to using my full brain capacity to just do this thing that was very easy for me to do, coming up with as a advertising copywriter, coming up with a cute tagline or something like that. It would just come to me.
Right.
And now I have to work at it, and I'm still good at it. I still can do it. I can still operate on a professional level, but it's much more difficult to do.
And here you are now that this aphasia, this chemo has unveiled this new artistic avenue, and it's an avenue that's got its own challenges, doesn't it?
Indeed, yeah. There are years in which I am focused and I create 50 paintings, and it's just great, and everything is just flowing, and I have no trouble finding inspiration. Such as 2023, last year, I painted more paintings than I had ever painted before. I painted 53 paintings, and I've done 138 in total in my entire career.
Wow.
So that was almost half of all the paintings I've ever created. I did.
That's formidable. That's congratulations.
Right, exactly. And almost all the paintings hanging up in here right now are from last year. And this year, and the year before that, I'm having difficulty doing that, and not finding the inspiration easy. I have a boatload of images on my phone in a little directory that are things that I want to paint, but I'm not
right.
Finding the inspiration is more difficult. So yeah, there are a lot of ups and downs with being an artist in general.
And we can touch on more of that, I think, with the second podcast, because I think that's where you dispense your wisdom to all of us. Curious, where did you? It's Kenny DARKPOET.
Yes,
LAPINS. Now, when I saw that, I thought, okay, this guy. He's into Shelley.
Right.
What gives?
As you can see, I have it.
I love your painter smock. That's smart.
Right.
I get one of those.
It's really just a very vain thing. I had a friend who lived in Brooklyn, and she and I had been friends for 30 years. And I went to visit her probably 20 years ago now, and she and all of her friends in Brooklyn 20 years ago were all hipsters, and all had hipster names, right?
Got it.
So they all had these little monikers that they went by, and they only went by them. They were very serious about this. Is my name. Don't call me this other thing.
Love it.
And so I decided I wanted to have one too. And so at the time, as I said, I was mostly a writer, and my poetry, like my art, is very flowery and bright and colorful. And so I went with a name that's the opposite of that, dark poet, to be a little bit ironic. And I really like that. And my middle name actually starts with a D anyway, Dean. And so I just took it as a moniker. And once I became a painter, I'm like, okay, well, this is perfect, because now I have this name which is going to make me stand out. Again, as a painter, you need to find something that's a hook.
Yeah.
So, like you said, you went to my website, you saw that, and it immediately made you think of something. Doesn't matter what it is, but it became a thing.
By the way, let's give your website right now. It's
www.kennydarkpoetlapins.com.
Easy enough.
Yeah.
So you found this hook. I think DARKPOET has a little more drama than Dean.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
That's my name turned out that there's another Martin McCormack that paints over in Ireland. And then there's another Martin McCormack that's a musician. So I went with my middle name, Martin Lawrence McCormack.
Right.
It would have been probably better to have had a more mysterious moniker, to be honest. But let's take a little break, and when we come back, I want to talk to you a little bit about your background. You know, where you grew up and how you got into your writing. You know, you're making you were making a living doing art to begin with, which is admirable. And we're talking to Kenny DARKPOET Lapins, and we're in his studio home, and you are on Strung Out.
Hey, want to show your support of Martin's artist endeavors? Buy Me a Coffee is an online site that makes supporting Marty easy. In just a few taps, you can make a payment of any amount, and no account is needed. You can also decide to become an ongoing supporter. Go to martinmccormack.com and click on the words Support Martin. Let's help Martin keep it all caffeinated.
When I was a kid, it lived under my bed. When I was older, it lived in my closet. Nowadays, it likes to live in my head. There's just no way I can dodge it. Fear is a friend and a foe. Fear, it's with me wherever I go. We know fear, a foe but a friend, and it's gonna be with me to the end. I fear whenever there's something new, it holds me back. If there's a change, it gets real mad. When I wanna leap, it attacks. How can something so good be so bad? Fear is a friend and a foe. Fear is with me wherever I go. We know fear, a foe but a friend, and it's gonna be with me to the end. I fear. I see it lives in you and I look in your eyes. Let's work together and find a way to get over our fear and through its lies, and finally make our fear obey. Fear is a friend and a foe. Fear is with me wherever I go. We know fear, a foe but a friend, and it's gonna be with me to the end. Fear is a friend and a foe. Fear is with me wherever I go. We know fear, a foe but a friend, and it's gonna be with me to the end. I fear. And we're back after that little break. Are you? Did you grow up around here, or where? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. I'm a lifelong Chicagolandian. I'm from Skokie originally. Lived in Chicago for a while, so I can't call myself a Chicago person. But right now we are here in Lombard because I'm living with my oldest daughter, who is a doctoral candidate at Midwestern University, just down the street from here.
Fantastic.
So we're living here to be close to her school.
Sure.
But yeah, I grew up in Skokie. I lived all of my life within 100 miles of Lake Michigan. Mm-hmm. And whether it's in the suburbs, or I went to school in Indiana, in Bloomington, Indiana. But I started my career as a writer really in high school.
Okay.
I was, I remember very distinctly, which is unusual for me because my memory usually is terrible due to this mental decline of mine. But I remember one day before school started, my friends and I always gathered in this one room, the English Resource Center.
Okay.
And we stayed there for half an hour before school started just to meet and to gather and whatever. And I, just on a lark, sat down at the typewriter of the person who runs the English Resource Center and just started typing a funny newscast.
Right.
And, involving all of my friends, like, Seth was found dead at a blah, blah, blah. And it's, and I wrote it in the
stream of consciousness kind of thing. Great.
Right. In the cadence of a newscast. And my friends and I were all in the theater in high school. So one of the theater people came behind me and started reading it like a newscaster, and everybody was laughing, and it was just hysterical. And it was just this thing I did, on a lark. Mm-hmm. And it was at that moment that I'm sure I caught this writing bug, and just started to write not only high school and college essays as needed, but also poetry on my own, and some short stories and stuff like that, which I have since then looked at, and it's all terrible. But but in the high school mind, it's like, oh, this is the greatest thing I've ever written.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Way before AI too.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. And so then I went to college and was an English major, and in every class where I took, where there was a final that was, do a presentation to the class or write a 20-page paper, which nobody ever did, and that's why it was 20 pages, because the teacher didn't really ever want to read a 20-page paper. But I'm like, oh yeah, I'll do that. That's easy, great. For example, I took advertising and the introduction to advertising, and the final exam for that class was to do a advertising pitch. Sure. Of whatever. Or write a 20-page paper. Like, nobody wrote the paper because everybody was in marketing and wanted to do the thing.
Get out there and pitch.
Right. Yeah. So I wrote a 20-page paper on the ethics of advertising, and I quoted Socrates and Aristotle and talked about how truly atrocious it was, all the things we learned in that class that year, like creating a fancied need, which is how the people that invented underarm deodorant made people want to buy it. Like, it doesn't matter if you smell, but oh my God, you smell, you have to fix that. People are going to hate you. Yeah. And so therefore you need to buy our product as underarm deodorant.
Yeah, I mean, advertising, I did marketing advertising in my college, and you learned that it's maybe in some ways it's honest in the sense that they're being dishonest.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there are literally laws about how far they can go with their dishonesty, and they always go right up to the wall. Right. I remember I saw an advertisement for a razor for shaving, and it said #1 in overall satisfaction. That means absolutely nothing.
Absolutely.
It wasn't even that. It was #1 in overall performance.
Oh wow, even better.
Even less.
Right.
And I was thinking to myself, well, what does that mean? And of course, how ironic, I ultimately went into advertising as my career, because as a professional writer, there are only so many things somebody can do. I mean, Stephen King
Right.
is a novelist, and I can maybe name 5 more off the top of my head. So I wasn't going to become a famous novelist. So I had
Is that what were you hoping? You know, I would become like a writer like Stephen King, or you know, let's not disparage advertising too much, because one of the great challenges of advertising
Oh, sure.
is coming up with something that's
absolutely.
fresh and novel, and you know,
Sure.
you are trying to sway people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but was that your goal? Were you thinking, oh, I'm going to be the next great American novelist, or were you like,
Yeah.
what was your feeling?
I started several novels and never finished any, so I kind of gave up on that
Okay.
on that dream.
Sure.
And I went into advertising and enjoy it for all the reasons you just said. You know, creating an 8-word phrase that fits in this box right here that makes people want to act
Yeah.
and do a thing is actually a great challenge.
It is.
And so I've taken it up, and I have stuck to my guns several times. For example, I was at Leo Burnett for a while, and the account manager came up to me one day and said, "Hey, listen, we would like you to be on the Philip Morris account." And I'm like, "Yeah, I don't know if I can do that.
Yeah.
That's pushing my limit." So ultimately, I turned that down to the detriment of my career. Actually, I mean,
Sure.
they pay more. You're on that account, you have a separate contract. You're in a secluded area. You know, you ultimately aren't allowed to talk to anybody, including your relatives, about the work you do there.
So the deal with the devil.
Exactly. So I ultimately, you know, I stuck to my guns pretty good with regard to that. But yeah, so, you know, when a art director comes up to me and says, "We have to come up with a tagline right now. It's due in 3 hours. Help! We need 8 words." That's actually kind of fun.
It is.
You know, it gets you going. So I have definitely enjoyed my career in writing.
Painting tells stories.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems that, you know, going into painting and for a person with cognitive decline, geez, I'd like to have seen you when you didn't have any. I mean, you're pretty, you know, you're with it. So do you have your good days and bad days? Or
Yeah, indeed.
Is that kind of how it works with it?
Absolutely. I've been trepidatious about this interview itself, because am I going to be stumbling over my words or not? And it,
so far so good.
right. But I didn't know which way it was going to go, and you know, and that's exactly the way it happens. Sometimes things are great, sometimes things are not. You know,
When that happens, though, you don't have to worry about that when you're painting, right?
no, not at all.
I mean, it's total freedom.
And again, I'm using a different part of my brain too that is unaffected. So I get in. I am very familiar about getting into flow.
Right.
You know, where everything else disappears and you're concentrating on the thing that you're doing, and it seems to, you know, things seem to come through you as opposed to you coming up with stuff and doing it. So I'm very familiar with that idea when I was writing early in my career, and I get in that same zone when I'm painting and get, you know, really, and it's interesting because in a painting you are dealing with this canvas that is contained in a space.
Yeah, it's finite.
Right, and when you're writing, that's not the case.
No.
The entire world is possible, and as a matter of fact, you can create a world that's as large as you want it to be. And you can also create a world in a painting, but it has to fit within your canvas, unless you do a series, and I've done that as well, where I have several canvases that make up a series of stuff.
Nice.
But you know, you can get really close in on a detail. You can spend an hour on one leaf, and just focus on it and get it to be exactly, you know, what you want it to be. And that's also true of writing. You know, I am a big fan of Charles Dickens. He's my favorite author. I did an independent study in college when I was an English major about Dickens, and the thing that's really amazing about him is that you take any page of any book that he's written, take it completely out of context, and look at the sentences, and they're beautiful.
Yeah.
Every single one of them is a masterclass in how to use punctuation, grammar, and idioms and just imagery.
Yeah, he delivers a line or a story. I mean, he's being very, very deliberate.
Very
in
deliberate
his word
every
choices.
Every single word has been poured over. There's no question. Because of the way, and Shakespeare is the same way, obviously, and even more so because he's working like a painter on a canvas within a structure of iambic pentameter. So he only has 10 syllables to work with.
So he has his limitations. So So that's a great observation. Because writing, I can see how the art would flow from the writing, and even though in your case it was, purely by accident or purely by an illness, and we're going to take one more break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk a little more about your art for the rest of this podcast. We are with Kenny, DARKPOET LAPINS, and we are on Strung Out.
Hello, this is Polly Chase, presenting artwork by Martin McCormick. This painting, titled Dude, features a mountain range that holds a special place in Marty's heart. On the canvas, which measures 20 by 24, we see the Tetons rising in the hazy distance of a view from an abandoned dude ranch just outside Jackson Hole, Wyoming, near Marty's parents' old place. The cool blues and violets of the background complement the buttery yellow foreground. These colors pass the viewer's attention back and forth along the horizontal plane, while the decaying Model T sinks into that scrubby landscape from which the majestic peaks punch upward along the vertical plane. It's a quiet yet very moving scene, both artistically and emotionally. It pulls the imagination into a human story waiting to be told, one witnessed by rock that is millions of years old. To explore this painting and more of Marty's artwork, go to martinmccormick.com.
We're in our final bit for this podcast, and we're going to be doing another podcast with Kenny. And one of the questions that I wanted to ask you about is, what is your favorite color?
Purple.
Yeah.
It's very simple, and I don't know why it is, but it's always been my favorite color ever since I was a young kid. I remember distinctly getting a pair of purple Chuck Taylor high tops.
Oh, interesting.
And that I wore them every single day for years.
Yeah.
And and again, this was back when I was a kid, so this was 40 years ago. It wasn't easy like it is now to get a pair of purple Chuck Taylor All-Star high tops.
Yeah.
Because there was no internet and you couldn't necessarily just find Converse. Where would you go? Mm-hmm. So I had to sleuth around and make phone calls and use the phone book and find out where I could find them. And I tracked them down and got them, and they're my favorite shoes. And I have another pair now.
So purple, just looking at your paintings in this room, and for those of you that are listening to the podcast, every one of Kenny's paintings in this room has some shade of purple.
Indeed.
And it's beautiful. I think purple is a calming color.
Right.
And it's a color that most people look at, and it's calming in the sense it's either dawn or it's dusk. Mm-hmm. That kind of feeling, that time of the day when you're already you're in that REM state, and you have an awesome, beautifully done picture of the Baha'i.
Yeah.
And with a beautiful purple sky, and it's also washing over the Baha'i. Mm-hmm. And when you choose a subject, how do you choose it? Does it choose you, or are you just like...
Yeah. That's a great question. I think about Claude Monet a lot because he painted what he saw around him, whether it was his own garden at Gaverny or somewhere else that he was sitting with his easel. That's one of the reasons I love looking at his paintings, because he is literally sitting there painting this thing, and now you're looking at what he was looking at.
Yeah.
And so I try to recreate that, in that I will look around the places where I live and work, and usually in the city of Chicago, and say, I love that building, I'm going to paint that building. Or, look at those CTA L trains go by, they're amazing.
You're right.
And and the Baha'i Temple, I've driven by that 100 million times in my lifetime, and every time that I do on Sheridan Drive there, I stare at it and marvel how absolutely beautiful it is.
It's magnificent, yeah.
Right. And so, when I look at something that isn't beautiful, like the Baha'i Temple, I still see it that way, because the way I see the world is in parts.
Okay.
So if I'm looking at a building, most people would look at the building and say, that's a building.
Right.
I look at a building and I say, look at those windows that are squares that are on top of each other so geometrically perfectly.
Is this something that had to do with the illness, or is this just the way you've always perceived life?
Always the way I've perceived the world around me.
That's fascinating.
And I try to capture it in my paintings in that way. That I see, I don't know that I see colors that aren't there necessarily, because that would be weird, but I definitely see patterns.
Okay.
And there are certainly the architect who built these buildings did that on purpose.
Sure.
Made sure, they don't just put the windows anywhere, they put them in the line, and then there's a small one and a big one, and a small one and a big one, and then that was just something that they worked on when they were sitting down at their desk drafting out this thing. They said, I'm going to put a little bit of interest in my building, even though it's just a regular building. I'm looking right outside the window right here at the apartment building across the way there, and it's an ugly white brick building with gray paneling. It's horrendously ugly.
It's utilitarian for sure.
It's utilitarian. That's a great way of putting it. But even in the utilitarianness of it, there's a window that's cut in two with a beam coming down, and the shades are pulled down exactly that way. And then right above that is a grate, and right above that is another window that's just like it, and then a grate. And so it's a beautiful little pattern.
So when you look at that, let's say, you're seeing those patterns, are you seeing, in your mind, are you saying, wow, that's beautiful?
Indeed. That's nice. What I try to do when I recreate my paintings of just regular buildings. Yes, the Baha'i Temple is a beautiful building, and regardless of how I painted it, it would have been great. But I have a painting, of the Madison, Wisconsin skyline, a gas station, a firehouse. I have another painting of a post office. And, not only did I blow the colors out to make, to throw it in the viewer's face that this is beautiful, even though you don't think it is, the brick on the building is really interesting, and they're not exact. They're not exactly the same shape and size, and they create a pattern only in a larger sense.
Yeah.
And the glass window of this building is really pretty, and the things that are inside, and so I paint that and make it interesting.
What has changed for you now that you are a visual artist first? A writer second, still a writer, if you can do that way. You're a writer that very few people are able to say, hey, I'm practicing my art and eating from it.
Right.
But you are. But you have this. So what has changed for you now that you are a visual artist first?
Well, I'll tell you, there's two things. The first is that the way I approach art is different, because when I write something and put it out in the world, I can give it away, but I can still read it anytime I want. So if I write a poem and I give it to somebody, they say, thank you, this is beautiful, thank you, this is
Right.
great. And I've done my job as an artist, putting the art out into the world and trying to change minds or just soothe the soul. But I can always come back and read that painting, that poem.
Piece, yeah.
It still belongs to me.
Right.
But when I paint a painting and I give it to somebody, it's gone.
Yeah.
I can only look at a picture of it. And
Right.
a picture of a painting is great, but it's not the same.
Right. Absolutely.
It's like giving a child away. And so, that aspect of art it's difficult. I honestly, it pains me to sell my paintings. And I don't paint so that I can make money, because that would be a disaster. If I started this saying I'm only going to paint if I, make money on it, that would be horrifying, because I've sold, like I said, I've sold, a third of all the paintings I've ever painted, and really all I've made from it is enough money to buy more supplies.
More supplies.
Right.
But that's an important point to make, and we should delve into that even more on the next podcast, because this is it's a labor of love, right? Pointing out beauty.
That's right.
Pointing out color, pointing out this. It's such a hard. That in and of itself is hard, because there's only so many Mondays.
Right.
Right? And even though you want to be that, and maybe I'm putting words into your mouth, how do you want to be remembered then?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I believe the artist's job is to tell the truth. And so if I'm remembered as somebody who has presented his view of the world in the things that I've written and in the things that I've painted, then I will die a happy guy. So do I want to be remembered as a writer or a painter? I would like to be remembered as an artist. And regardless of what, there are lots of people out there that can do more than one thing.
Yes.
You watch a movie and, Ryan Gosling all of a sudden is playing the piano and dancing and singing.
Right.
How did he learn to do that? So, people have lots of different talents that come through or don't. And, and it's very sad when somebody has artistic talent and they aren't allowed to express it, or can't express it for some reason, or don't know that they're an artist. There are so many people out there that are artists that have no idea, because would I have known that I'm a painter if my friend Annie had not said, hey, let's go to this thing?
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't.
Right. Well, and that's the fickle hand of fate in some ways, right? That we all are beholden to. One last question before we finish this thing up with this podcast. What I haven't heard you say is, I had the chemotherapy, aphasia, it's affecting me. There are good days, bad days. Are you the kind of person that takes something like that and you say, okay, I'm going to use it to my advantage? Or are you the kind of person that's going to be like saying, I had this happen to me and now I'm going to use it to bring everybody in? There's that route. Or are you just like, I'm Kenny DARKPOET LAPINS. I have this, and look at my paintings.
Right. Yeah, no, it certainly opened my eyes. Having been that close to my own mortality made me look at my life and say, am I doing the things right? Am I satisfied with what I'm doing? And it also has gotten me involved with an organization called Twist Out Cancer, which is I'm on the advisory board of this organization that provides emotional and social support to cancer survivors and people that are caregivers for people that have cancer. And they have a program called Brushes with Cancer, in which they pair an artist with an inspiration.
Oh, wow. Cool.
And the inspiration tells the artist their little cancer story. I had this and it affected me in this way, or I cared for my husband who ultimately died of cancer, and here's what it makes me feel. And the artist then creates a piece of art based on that interaction.
Oh, wow. Fun. And intriguing as well.
Right, totally unique. And, the inspiration gets support through the interaction with the artist. They get to tell their story. They get to unload, things that might be bothering them, and just the connections with people is ironic. And let me tell you a little twist of fate. About 12 years ago, I was working for a pro bono organization called EPIC, which was an organization that got agency creatives in Chicago involved in pro bono projects for organizations that could not otherwise afford to work with Leo Burnett or Ogilvy to come up with their marketing materials. And the project that I was assigned to was this new organization called Twist Out Cancer. And one of my jobs was to come up with a tagline for the organization. And so I thought about it for a while, and I came up with Share, Connect, Heal. Because that's what you do. You share your story, you connect with your artist, and by doing that, heal.
So right to the point.
And that's what they, to this day use as their tagline. So I've melded both my writing and my art painting in this one organization, and it really gives me I've done it for 5 or 6 years now, as both an artist and an inspiration in different years. And it just is a tremendous way to give back. And I think that's what's really important.
Yeah.
Is that each of us has some skill set that nobody else has. Because each of us is a unique individual. And if you give back what you have in whatever way is comfortable to you, to help others, that is what the ultimate goal of life should be.
It is, isn't it? I mean, that's the only way for me that life makes sense.
Right.
Otherwise, I would run screaming.
Right. Right. So I've been given the ability to write things that affect people one way or the other, and whether that's looking at a billboard that they see my tagline on, but also I create paintings, and to me it's actually, even though I was a writer for 40 years and a painter for 11, painting is much more intimate to me because I am literally showing you what's in my heart on this little canvas here. Now, I guess that's the same as a writer showing what's in their heart on a printed page, but I believe, like I was saying, that giving a painting away is like giving away a child. It just feels so much more intimate, the relationship. I've been standing at galleries when I'm having a show with somebody who's asking me a question about my painting. We're both looking at it, and I'm realizing, wow, we're talking about this piece of art here that I created. How bizarre is that?
Well, yeah, with art, with visual art, you're in the moment forever.
Yeah, like
as opposed to music,
right?
Or live music, especially, where the whole idea is you perform, it goes off into the ether, and we shared this thing. And with writing, writing, it's different. It's different because you have to read what you have. Somebody has to read what you have put down, and it's always coming in with a different kind of voice or whatever, their interpretation, but. When you look at canvas, you're in the moment.
Right, and you're looking at the same, like I was saying about Monet, you're looking at the exact same thing that he was looking at, 150 years ago when he painted this thing, and you're looking at it the way he saw it.
Right.
So he's putting you in his shoes, and that's a lot of what I do with my painting, is that I try to put people in my place that, when you're looking at a CTA train, it's not just an ugly gray train. It's this beautiful piece of engineering that has these little squares that are really nice, and sometimes the sun catches it in such a way that there's a glare, and and just for a moment it has a little yellow tint to it. So appreciate that. Appreciate the things that you look at when you are looking at both art and the real world, because they're both the same.
Well, we're going to wrap up this podcast and head into the second podcast with Kenny, Dark Poet Lapins. And I want to thank you so much for letting me into your home. And also showing the art. We're going to, for the people watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see the art, in bits and pieces as we go through these things. For those of you that listen to this, I really suggest you go to Kenny's website and check out some of this beautiful art. It's really, it's really, if you're into purple, this man's your artist. So we'll be back with our next podcast with Kenny next week. But for now, we'll see you later. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. And we're done. Excellent. For that one.
Terrific.
And do you need any break or anything? You're doing great.
No.
Thank you for listening. For more information about this show or a transcript, visit martinmccormack.com. While there, sign up for our newsletter. See you next time on Strung Out.